Welcome to the Man Up, Man Down podcast, presented by Volker Beluda and David Pawsey. We discuss the pressures and challenges faced by men approaching middle age that we're often too embarrassed to speak about with our friends. You can find us online at www.manupdown.com. Enjoy the show and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
Brilliant. So welcome to another episode of Man Up, Man Down. So it's with pleasure to introduce Barney Whiter. Barney is a financial and career coach. He has a degree in economics and trained as a chartered accountant before working in corporate finance in London for over 20 years. An advocate for avoiding debt, Barney paid off his mortgage as soon as he could, age 32. So I'm really curious about that, actually. And then got to financial independence, age 43, whilst married and supporting a family with 3 children. So curious how you lived, Barney. Since 2014, he has been coaching and writing about financial freedom, career change, and health. Barney is currently, so I don't know if this figure's up to date, on day 891 without alcohol. So I don't know where we are with that. But Barney, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I first found you guys actually because you interviewed William Porter, the author of Alcohol Explained. And it was William who I found his book incredibly informative, useful, valuable in quitting booze. And so, I'm now like over day 900.
Wow. That's over 3 years. Need to do the math. I mean, I've read this book. I'm still drinking, for better or for worse, but it does make you think. I mean, as a matter of fact, this time of recording, because it's a Friday and I can't drink tonight, I thought last night, I just have a drink. And I regret it every time I drink during the week. I just don't want to do it anymore. You know, I was fine this morning. I still went to the gym. I still did my 45-minute run. But it's just not the same. So it's actually a silly thing to do, to be honest.
Well, I hate sort of sobriety bores. Like when I drank, I used to hate people banging on about quitting booze. I was like, oh, you are the most annoying person in the world. So, but I just kind of got to the point where the costs and the benefits just made no sense at all for me to carry on drinking. So, I'm all for like drinking in moderation. Unfortunately, Barney cannot do drinking in moderation.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because you know, if I crack, I keep saying that on this podcast, or in general, but you know, if I crack open a bottle of red, you know, I finish the bottle of red, whether my wife helps me or not. And my wife,
like, are we doing this properly or not? Like, you can't just leave stuff in the bottle.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with whiskey. I don't finish a bottle of whiskey just, but, you know, whiskey is it's just such a nice drink, right, to have. I can get carried away. So was there any reason that sparked, you know, you going alcohol free, or was it just because, as you just said, the benefits or the cost benefit weren't there anymore?
Well, no, that's a good question. And I would like to say I made a rational, informed sort of choice, and but no, the truth is I had like the mother of all wake up calls. So sometime after, I had 2 health scares, sometime sort of just after COVID. Firstly, I had an endoscopy, and I was having a sort of reflux problem, and I had a very unpleasant procedure where they put a camera down your esophagus and have a look in. So I had that, which was very unpleasant and sort of reminiscent of the film Deep Throat. And the other like mega wake up call for me in relation to alcohol is sometime after COVID, I just lost my libido. And so I just went on this health journey to like figure out like what had caused that. And after about, a year's worth of research, reading like, tons of books on diet, on exercise, on metabolism, etc., I had to sort of come to the very unpleasant conclusion that it was probably the alcohol, and that, you know, as a guy, like if you lose your libido, you're like, okay, I'm gonna make some changes in my life.
Yeah, I mean that's. I'm trying to remember if that's a typical side effect of alcohol, but I assume your libido came back then.
Well, you're so drunk that you can't remember whether
Well,
that's a side effect of alcohol or not vodka.
I mean, did it come back then? I take it after you gave up
yeah.
alcohol.
But it's actually very common. So I read the best book on this is a book called The Biology of Desire, and it's a fascinating book. The guy that wrote it is a neuroscientist, a guy called Mark Lewis, Professor Mark Lewis. So he's a professor of neuroscience, but in his early days, when in his 20s, he was a heroin addict. And so, there's plenty of neuroscientists in this world. There's plenty of heroin addicts, but there's not many people that combine the two. And so he is just like brilliant on anything to do with substance abuse and habit formation and the effects that has on the wiring of your dopamine system and the wiring of your brain. And I read this book, his book, The Biology of Desire, and in some ways, all addictions operate in the same way, in the sense that you progressively get more and more of your dopamine from the behavior of abuse or the substance of abuse.
Yeah.
And you get less and less from everything else. So this is why heroin addicts lose interest in their work, they lose interest in their children, they lose interest in music, and they lose interest in sex, because their dopamine system rewires just to focus on the hit that they get from the substance of abuse. And so, all heroin addicts lose their libido. And I can't speak for all people, all sort of people that abuse alcohol, but it certainly screwed mine up.
I've so sort of as you were talking, I can sort of see a few, I guess, correlations between. Obviously, your sort of profile is the escape artist and finding financial freedom, and and you're sort of talking about, well, with addiction or sort of habit change, it is about, well, delaying that gratification.
Yes.
So, as you're saying this, I can sort of see a few sort of correlations between getting your finances sorted out, because, so many of us do kind of make those impulse buys, buy things to make us feel better a lot of the time. And as you say, kind of, if you're doing that, then, sometimes you need to buy that bigger sort of present for yourself, or, so, I mean, is that sort of from, you sort of, obviously you were doing that for a long time before you gave up alcohol. I mean, did you sort of see any of those correlations at all?
Yeah. So, I've always been fascinated by what makes people do what they do, and what makes people decide between, short-term pleasure and long-term gain. And for me, like, money is just such an obvious, like, universe where that applies. You can literally either, spend the money that you get immediately and get the sort of instant dopamine hit of the shiny new thing, or you can stick it into, your investment vehicle, and, it'll come out in 10 years time, worth, maybe double or treble what it's worth today. That's all about trade-offs between the here and now and later on. And so, like, I've just always been fascinated by, like, what makes people tick, and what makes people choose behaviors that are ultimately productive, useful, valuable, and rewarding, versus short-term behaviors that are like essentially self-sabotage.
Yeah, I mean, sort of had a relatively interesting situation recently where my daughter wanted to buy some trainers, and she's basically been, well, a friend of the family has said, "Oh, I've got a load of old clothes I don't need. If you put them on Vinted, and sell them, then give me half, and you can have half." And then my daughter sort of said to my wife, "I want to buy some trainers, so can you advance me some money, and then I'll pay you back when I've sold these things?" And afterwards I was like, "Well, why didn't you just say, well, actually, get on and sell those clothes?" And
Yeah.
then, and I'm like that, and I've got a sort of quite a big hang up about this whole. Well, we live in a society of instant gratification, and sort of my favorite analogy at the moment is sort of talking about how, not that long ago, if you wanted to watch a film on a Friday night, you'd basically get in the car or walk to the video shop. Then, you'd see what's available. Excuse me, you'd see what's available, go through. If you're with a friend or a housemate or whatever, your sibling, you then have a discussion of like, oh, what do we both want to watch out of all this? Then you'd go home, watch the film. If it was good or bad, you'd still watch it, and then you have to take it back. But there was like a big ritual behind it. Whereas now, and you'd have to wait. If you hadn't seen that film at the cinema, you'd have
Yeah.
to wait a good year, I think, before it came out on video. Whereas now, you can, well, go on Netflix, go on Amazon Prime, and download that instantly. If it's not any good, you're like, oh, right, go on to the next thing. And yeah, I'm just like, we went on holiday to Spain a few years ago, and they had a videotape, and I was just quite excited that they got to experience rewinding a videotape. It just sounds really silly, but
Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of like we're in a society of instant gratification, and we sort of, before we came on air, we talked about Elon Musk, but it is, we seem to be in a place where we're just determined to make things easier for ourselves, where and I know that a lot what you talk about is kind of the incremental gains, the Steve Peters 1%, sorry, not Steve Peters, Dave Brailsford 1%, whereas it's like, well, actually no, I don't want those little 1%, so I want that instant 10% gain. But
Yep.
yeah, sorry, there's not really a question there. That was just
But your anecdote illustrates how society has changed. So, I bang on about this all the time. Like in my day, if I wanted a video, I had to walk down to Blockbuster, and I had to put some effort into it. And essentially what technology plus consumer capitalism has done is attempted to take all of the friction out of the purchasing decision and just send this stuff, almost like inject it into your veins seamlessly without you ever needing to get out of your armchair. And so that's the game that these kind of big, without wishing to sound too conspiratorial, that is the game that all these big tech companies and these consumer companies are trying to get us to all play without thinking about it, which is consume passively. And it's like if you start watching a series on one of these streaming services, like on Netflix, you watch episode 1 of Game of Thrones, and if you don't do anything, episode 2 just tees up and starts playing, right? And then you get through season 8 to episode 10 of Game of Thrones, and it says you may also like Vikings or whatever, or Valhalla, or and then that starts playing. And so they've removed all the friction from all of this stuff in society. And so my point is that if you're not kind of a little bit skeptical and mindful and intentional and conscious that you are operating in this environment, you're kind of living in a sweet shop, okay? And so it's kind of hard not to, put on weight when you're living in a sweet shop. And that sort of applies across the board. And so like part of what I talk about is just like being very aware of like spending decisions, for example, and like working on kind of your default settings, so that you don't just automatically have money leaking out of your life like water leaking out of a bucket shot full of holes.
So let's talk about your financial independence and paying off your mortgage at 32. How did you manage that? I mean, I think I didn't even get a mortgage until I was 30, so I assume you started a bit earlier. But did you earn so much, and then having a wife and 3 kids seems I mean, I have a wife and I have 2 kids, quite impressive. So tell us how you managed that. I'm really curious. Did you live off, I don't know, like bare minimum?
Well, firstly, it helps to be born in the right time.
Yeah.
If so, if you're born today, or if you're 21 today, and the average house price is 7 times income, versus like the 80s when there were times when the average house was 2 times income, 2 times average income, that makes a big difference. And so I'd like to say it was all Barney's genius, but like, when you're born and where you live, those have a lot of impact. So, I mean, I would actually kind of set the scene for how I got mortgage through by 32. Wind the clock back when I was 11. So I was born in 1970, so I was 11 in 1981. And in 1981, my parents moved house, and they did the classic British thing where you buy the biggest house that you can possibly afford. And to do that, they took out the biggest mortgage that they could. And unfortunately, that same year, interest rates went to 17%. And my dad worked in the construction industry as well. So his job was looking a bit dodgy for a while there, whilst interest rates went to 17% on the mortgage. And you can imagine like what would happen today if interest rates went to 17%, like the whole system would just basically fall over. So my dad had to cancel the newspaper, and he had to like brew his own awful home brew, and he couldn't afford to buy beer, and we couldn't go on holiday that year. So, boo-hoo, poor us. I mean, it wasn't terrible in the bigger scheme of things, but I did, as an 11-year-old, like pick up on the anxiety in the household. And I did take from that time and that experience that owing money to the bank was problematic, and that ultimately the bank can take your house away from you. And so that kind of instilled into me some sort of ungodly fear of being in debt, some ungodly fear of being homeless, and sort of from that point onwards, that kind of informed all my subsequent decisions. So, when it came to university, I did economics because I kind of perceived that like that would get me into finance, and finance at the time was like stockbrokers and Porsches on TV. And I thought, well, that looks better than, boring life in provincial Cambridgeshire. So I did economics, and then when I graduated, I trained as a chartered accountant and did my 3 years, and then I went into banking and corporate finance advice, working on mergers and acquisitions, basically because I was following the money. So I was always a bit of a prostitute in that sense. But that childhood experience said, like, no, you need money, therefore look at where you get the most money and do whatever you have to do to make the most money. So if I've been better looking and female, maybe I would have gone into prostitution. But for me, like, banking was a better option.
I think there's plenty of work for male prostitutes as well. Don't put yourself down, Barney. I mean, you've sort of hit on again, a few interesting things there. I mean, yeah, my dad passed away recently. He worked for BT all his life, but when he joined, it was still part of the civil service, so he had this, ironclad pension. So he's yeah, I sort of look at what he was able to achieve, and I'm thinking, well, to kind of get a house like that and to have accumulated, that financial stability, it's like now, yeah, you're looking well up the sort of the career ladder, or yeah, you've got to be wealthy, and I've sort of wouldn't describe, well, my parents divorced when I was 7, so my dad sort of kept the money, shall we say. So, I
Wow.
sort of, it was, for me, it was quite interesting because I sort of, on one hand, it's like my mum and stepdad really struggled for money. So I'd be wearing, hand-me-downs and stuff. But, at weekends, it's kind of like, all right, well, dad will buy us what we want, sort of thing. But yeah, and I sort of, yeah, think about my children, and I think, well, the only way they'll be able to get on the property ladder is if we can kind of build up that for them. But I mean, yeah, and the other thing, so yeah, the environment we're in at the moment, and and it's even different to sort of the 2007 credit crunch, because we had 120% mortgages, and I had friends that basically bought somewhere. And there were some friends that suddenly found that their house was worth a lot less than what they'd mortgaged for. Some, timed it right, and it set them up for life. Well, hindsight is always 2020. But I mean, the thing that sort of when you sort of said, oh well, we couldn't go on holidays, woe is me, sort of thing. But I think there is a lot of context around it, and especially of what we've gone through, the cost of living crisis. It's so for some people, it's like, oh well, we've had to dip into our savings a lot more. We've not been able to save as much. For some people, it's like, well, I've racked up lots of horrendous debt. So if we sort of look at those two extremes, you've got some people that are like, oh, am I getting the best out of my savings, or how can I sort of start building up those savings? And you've got someone that's like, well, that choice between eating and heating. And as I say, when you got credit card debt, I mean, can you sort of talk through the sort of guidance you'd give for those two scenarios?
Yeah, well, that's a great point, which is essentially that personal finance is personal to the individual. And so it's always contextual. And in some ways, this is the problem about, I mean, I write a blog about money. I've written about money for 10 years. And it's quite difficult to write for something that everyone thinks they understand, because everyone uses money, but people's money problems are just so different. And so I don't say, like, here's my sort of 10-step plan that applies to everyone, and like everyone can do this and everyone can pay their mortgage off by the time they're 30, and just do what I say, and I promise you that will happen. You kind of have to meet people where they are. You have to meet people where they are in life. And so everything is contextual. So there are principles that I do try and, essentially the 4 pillars of financial independence are: earn more, spend less, invest the difference wisely, and know how much is enough. So those 4 pillars are kind of universal, but the application would very much depend on, like, the person in front of you. So to answer your question, imagine the person who is, let's say it's a young guy, and he's, I don't know, he's 28, and he's just overspending, so he's got a job, but he's got credit card debt, and he's bought himself like a BMW on finance, and he's just living above his means. So the advice for him is just going to be very different to like someone else who's kind of a frugalista. So the advice for that guy is, stop being an idiot, stop thinking like with your egos, stop trying to show off, stop trying to prove to the world that you're richer than you are. I would put like a health warning down the side of his BMW that says, I don't actually own this BMW. I'm just renting it from the bank and trying to look, richer than I actually am. So yeah, that sort of not keeping up with the Joneses is part of it for that sort of avatar that I just mentioned. But equally, I see people like the complete opposite of that. So I see, I in my coaching, I'll see people who have like, they've saved all their life, and they've kind of built in that habit, and they actually struggle to spend money. They've kind of trained themselves over a lifetime of sort of being sort of sensible, in air quotes, being cautious, conservative, all these things. And they're like, they just never spend it. So I was talking to an older guy the other day, and he told me that in his best year, he earned, he's retired now. And he told me that in his best year, he used to earn 500,000 a year. And I asked him what car, what car did you buy when you were earning £500,000 a year regularly? And he said, like a secondhand Nissan Qashqai or something. And I'm like,
Good
oh.
miles to the gallon.
And I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. So it's very contextual on the individual, always.
Hello folks, it's Volker here. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As you know, I coach executives, whether that is for leadership skills, or sales leadership skills, or working as a therapist too. There are few ways I can help you to get unstuck, improve your work-life balance, or become a better version of yourself. So you will be more productive and have more time for your family. Whatever it is, you can join my client list of people from General Electric, Pepsi, DHL, Boots, and many others. Book a free exploratory call via my website, www.obnat.us. That's OBNAT.us. Now back to the show. I mean, paying off the mortgage, I think, is everybody's dream, right? Having said that, I think from a financial point of view, and obviously that's the question, it doesn't make sense necessarily to pay it off, right? If you're on a low interest rate, is it not better to invest the money somewhere else where you get a higher return? David is laughing. I don't know why he's laughing, but
Because I know that the answer is going to be, it depends. So just to give you some context, Barney, I spent quite a few years, I worked for Which on the personal finance team. Then I was at the FT working on financial advice publications, but I'm still hopeless with money. So I know that, it depends.
It's hilarious though. For me, it didn't depend. So because I had this childhood like programming, so my childhood experience gave me a sort of money blueprint, an operating system, which basically said, never be in debt. And if you are in debt, just get out of debt ASAP. So for me, I'm like, I'm just going to pay this mortgage off as soon as I possibly can. And so that's what I did. And so I personally found it, I just found it incredibly motivating. And I was quite happy to, at the margin, not go out for a meal if I knew that £100 or whatever was going to go off my mortgage. And I'm just a step closer to being in the position where the bank can't take my house away from me. So I was doing all that pretty much irrespective of the interest rate. But having said that, like when I had a mortgage, you paid 6 or 7% for that mortgage. So, it kind of did make sense to pay off the mortgage. I mean, I say to people now, who've got I was literally talking to a lady this morning. She's still got one of those 1.4% mortgages. I mean, if you can borrow money at 1.4%, invest it in the stock market and get 10% a year, I suggest you borrow as much as you possibly can and, and never pay it off. And just let inflation rip, and you're still paying 1.4%, and every year your mortgage debt is shrinking in real value. The government's got your back. So we live in a world today where in some ways you are incentivized not to pay off the mortgage.
Yeah. So I'm doing everything right. I'm not on 1.49. I'm 1.99 still, I think, or
Wow.
98 or something like that. Until next January. So I got another year. And then it might bite me in the buttocks, but we'll see. We don't know what
But
we'll do.
on the sort of paying off your mortgage thing, I remember there was a show on the BBC. I think it was 10 years ago, and it was. I found it very striking, and the format of the show. There was some businessman guy, and every week he would meet a family who had a normal family, had a mortgage, and he would just coach them on what they could sell from the garage, like what they, could they rent out a room, could they buy sort of secondhand clothes for the kids for a bit, and just really rip into their budget and apply a big brain to sort of normal domestic spending decisions. And so this I can't remember the name of the guy, but he was some sort of serious businessman, sort of Alan Sugar type, who just went in and ripped into people's budget and said, no, you're being an idiot. Don't buy that. Do this, do that, sell this, sell that. And it was incredible how many of these ordinary people had paid their mortgage off after 2 years. And so this thing that we just think, oh, that just needs to run for 25 years. That show just used to make people think and kind of just throw some brain power at the problem.
I mean, that was going to be sort of one of my questions. You sort of mentioned, this TV program. This guy was a businessman, and that was going to be sort of one of my questions to you. Sort of knowing your background you were a chartered accountant, were you? But yeah. And and you speak to any business, and it's how you manage your costs. That's how you make money, is how you manage your costs. So, is it almost like we need to take that approach a lot more, treat ourselves as a business? I mean,
yeah.
And I sort of, with the nature of both, my wife works in sales, so a lot of that is commission based. I'm a contractor, so we can have a month where the car insurance has been renewed. Everything seems to happen in that month, and we all, there's 4 members of the family that have a birthday in the same month, and it's almost like, well, if we, if all those factors collide, and we've not, both my partners had a bit of a slow month, I've had a slow month, then it's like, oh wow, we need to kind of make some decisions. And again, sort of going back to what I was saying, that, oh, well, we won't eat out as much, and I know that there are people that have to make much tougher decisions, but it is amazing. It's sort of, if you get into a mentality of I need to reserve my costs, conserve my costs, and then it's almost like, well, if you carry on that behavior and those habits, and then suddenly the money comes back in, you're like, wow, I'm doing really well. And it's like, well, actually, it's not like we've suddenly got loads of money coming in. It's we've reduced those costs, and just got a bit more sensible about it. But then we soon then slip back into, all right, let's get a takeaway. let's go and get lunch from that cafe rather than, making sandwiches. Again, sort of stuff our parents used to do that, is I mean, yeah, and again, sort of going back to what I was saying about, instant gratification, but I think there are just so many sort of habits and behaviors. And a lot of that, I guess, came from sort of post-war rationing, etc., that, our parents sort of grew up in that environment, so
There's a word for what you're describing. It's lifestyle inflation. So if let's say you've got a job and you start on 30,000 and every year you get a 10% pay rise, well, the normal person will just inflate up their spending by 10% a year, because why wouldn't you? If you've been brainwashed to think that spending equals happiness and spending will bring happiness and buying more shit will bring you happiness, then what are you going to do when you get more money? You're going to buy more shit, right? And so that is that's how lifestyle inflation works. And for me, it was kind of weird. I remember, back in the day when I was a student, I was on 3,000. I had a grant or whatever of 3,000 a year. And then when I got my first job in London, I started on the princely sum of £12,500 a year. And I was more broke, on £12,500 a year than I was when I got 3,000 as a student. And I'm like, hold on, it obviously can't just be about your income. There must be something else involved, i.e. your spending. And, to your point about like treating this like a business, what does a business do? A business says, let's get the revenue up, let's get the costs down, let's make the profit as big as we can, and then we'll take the profit and we'll pay it as a dividend to the shareholders. That is what businesses do. And essentially what I kind of preach or teach is just treat yourself like you're a bit of a business. So get a good career or get a business, get your income up, get your costs down, maximize the delta, invest that wisely, and then you're essentially creating a freedom fund that one day will make work optional. So there's the CFO approach to running your own finances, or you could be like the bureaucrat, or like the council authority approach, which is I get a block grant, and I got to spend the grant that I get from central government every year, because like that's what we do. Like we don't want to not spend the money, right? And so I just say to people, just think a bit more like a CFO of a business.
So I'd just jump in with one more question, Volker. I mean, you sort of mentioned about increasing your income. I mean, if I work in retail, sorry, I don't, but if I was someone that worked in retail, so sort of long hours, 8 till 6 maybe, and it's like, well, I'm not gonna get a bonus, or there's no opportunities to increase my income unless it's with an annual wage review, which a lot of people haven't had one that's matched inflation. How do I increase my income?
So I look for careers whereby the career capital accrues to you, the employee, rather than the employer taking all of the benefit. And retail, essentially, if the whole game in retail at the moment is just to automate it and just like replace everyone with robots. And so like there's no retailer investing in people really at the moment. The whole game is let's just replace them with robots. So avoid retail. And I know that's like not, if you're already in retail, it's like that sort of direction advice when you're lost in the country, or I wouldn't start from here. But like we do, we all have a certain amount of power to like change where we work and what industry we go into. And so, I would, if I'm a normal person, I want to be like an apprentice plumber or an apprentice electrician. I don't want to work in a shop. I want to gain like a useful skill that where I can't easily be replaced by a robot, and where the value, the knowledge accrues to me. So I just get the more electrician work I do and the more plumbing work I do, the better I get at it and the more valuable I get. And also there's a path there to self-employment. And that way, you can get yourself where you're master of your own destiny and you're self-employed and you're the boss.
So again, it's almost that putting short-term gain aside. So, it is, well, actually, I've got to spend a year upskilling myself in the evenings, which probably means you won't spend so much money, going down the pub or whatever. But it is, it's that, again, sort of from a general philosophical view, in society, we just need to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And, and it is, well, again, going back to what I was saying, I think when you do have to survive on very little, it's quite amazing how easily, well, again, it's all context, but yeah, you do become aware of where you do hemorrhage money when you don't need to.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm always fascinated by, and you mentioned student, right? I mean, I lived like a king in halls. I had a part-time job as a teacher. I lived for free, so I didn't have any outgoings. So I had food included because I was a warden, and then I worked evenings as well. So I worked literally both ends of the day, studied during the day, and didn't have any outgoings. So I had laced weights delivered to me in 2 halls of restaurants, which was great. So always good wine and, living the dream. I had a better life than I have now, to be honest. But yeah, so those were the days. Not sustainable, I suppose, in the long run. I would imagine you're still at uni now, but anyway. Before we come to an end, there's one question I need to ask, because you talked about financial freedom, right? I mean, how would you define financial freedom? Does it mean you can retire? And then the big question we haven't really answered yet, pension, right? So I happily talk about my pension because it's very, very small and very, very short story. But you mentioned earlier, I think I was told put 10% of your salary away, each month. And I kind of did about 5% when I've got my first pension, which was way into my early 30s. So I have probably about 7 years to make up, and then I never increased it for many, many years in terms of the percentage I put in. So I know where the gap is, and again, what you said, right? I mean, you need to write things down. Where do you spend? To measure things. But what's your advice on pension? Especially if you have a big pension hole, like let's say I do, and I know from talking to other people, I'm not the only one. Do we just rely on the state pension?
Just don't retire, Volker. Just keep working.
Yeah, essentially, I anticipate I have to work until I'm 75. Because I'm probably going to live longer than. I mean, this is all subject to climate change and whatever our friends do in the States with their president and all, right? You never know what the world brings. But yeah, I reckon I have to work longer because I live longer, but then I also, have to work longer because of my pension.
So to answer your question, so how do I define financial independence? And then I'll come to pensions. So I would define financial independence is the point where work is optional. Okay. So where you have like a stash, you have a portfolio, you have a net worth, you have a stash of money. That means you're not forced to work again, and you can do that without state benefits.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's full on financial independence.
Nice.
And there's a sort of there's a financial independence. There's a set of books, blogs, and knowledge in the world of financial independence that is very helpful, I think, information for people when they're thinking about retirement, when they're thinking about pensions, and they're thinking about, well, what do I need to save? And ultimately, it all comes down to your percentage savings rate.
Right.
So we all know this on some level. Like, if you earn £1 million a year, but you spend £1 million a year, you're not building any wealth. Okay, so we all, I think, know that it's obviously great to earn more money, but it's only but from a financial independence perspective, earning more money just makes it easier to save a higher percentage of your income.
Yeah.
And the way the numbers work is that if you save 10% of your post-tax income every year, you're basically setting yourself up. You have to work for 50, 51 years before you can afford to retire. If you are able, and these are, I'm going to quote some extreme numbers here, not because I think this is easy or possible for everyone, but it just illustrates the point. If you're able to save 50% of your post-tax income, it only takes 16 years to go from broke to never needing to work again.
Wow.
And so what that illustrates is that it's all about the percentage of your post-tax income, your percentage savings rate. That determines when you get to financial independence, and that determines when you get to retire or scale down your your hours. And so that's all on the assumption that there's no state pension, that you don't do any work after you quit, and so that is based on some pretty prudent assumptions, that math. So it's all about your percentage savings rate. And that's why, cutting your spending is an important part of it. It's not just about getting your income up. It's not just about cutting your expenses. It's the combination of that and being able to invest your money sensibly. And in terms of like pensions are free money from the government. So there is no more tax efficient way to save than saving into a pension. And so essentially, if you're a 40% taxpayer, you put £60 into a pension and the government gives you £40 on that £60 and tops you back up to 100. And so like that's a sort of 40 over 60 is like a 2/3 guaranteed return on investment backed by Her Majesty's government, or His Majesty's government, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
So that is the most tax efficient form of saving, bar none. The government is rewarding you for doing that. And so like pensions, saving into a pension is awesome. The problem obviously is you can't get your hands on it until you're 57. The other problem is that a lot of people are paying money into a SIP, a self-invested personal pension, and sometimes they are not investing that money as effectively as they should, and often they're getting ripped off by the financial services industry.
Right.
So people are starting to wake up to this. There's been a lot of press about people, firms like St. James Place and the fees that they charge. Those fees make a massive, massive, massive difference to the pot that you end up with. So learning about pensions, learning how to invest your own portfolio, which actually anyone can do, and learning not to be screwed over by the financial services industry, I would argue, is all like super, super important.
No, that's super helpful. I mean, basically what you're saying, in my age, I need to up the percentage of what I need to
You're
put in.
playing catch up by the sounds of things.
Yeah. I mean, I have a financial advisor that tells me, he says, if you work until 70, 75, you'll be all right. He says, I'm like, great. I mean, they're
Funny
obviously,
enough, I'm actually all for working, as long as you can. I'm not. I mean, I've basically, I quit I quit my job when I was 43, and I basically didn't do anything for a while, and it gets boring pretty quickly, let me tell you. So I'm actually all for like working as long as you can, actually. But you really want to do that in a way, in a job that you enjoy the job, where you have some degree of autonomy and choice over what you're doing, the hours that you're doing, the type of work you're doing, and that it's not eating away at your soul. And, the reason I call my blog, The Escape Artist, is because essentially debt traps people. Debt and high spending and needing to make their credit card payments is the stuff that traps people in those low end sort of muck jobs, those sort of retail jobs. And that's the trap. That's the prison camp. That's like, if you're just in a low end job and you're running up debt, then they've got you and you're trapped in the system.
I mean, I have to say, I mean, my last final comment, I mean, we sat down, I think it was 2018, 2017, and I cut all my credit cards into pieces, although I paid them off every month, and I got great cash back from, the likes of American Express and, points for flights here and that. But I found it so difficult to reconcile, because it was the second thing I did. Let's say every other month, I sat down with a credit card. Where do I actually spend my money? And I'm always surprised how many people don't do that. And I'm now with another big independent bank, Monzo, and I get a breakdown every month, and I know exactly where my money goes. And that's my financial tip. But Barney, what's your final tip, and where can people find out more about you? Because we unfortunately have to wrap up. But that was super helpful and super insightful. So where can people find out more? You already mentioned your blog, and we put it all in the show notes as well.
So my final tip would be pay yourself first. So don't save what's left at the end of the month, because guess what? That won't be anything for most people. Better to, like, the day after payday, like stash it away, and then you'll naturally tend to adjust your lifestyle to how much is in your current account. So pay yourself first, treat yourself as more important than the shops, treat yourself, your future self, as more important than the pub. And prioritize yourself, be mindful of what you're spending, and put yourself first, pay yourself first, and apply own oxygen mask before helping others. So that's kind of my philosophy. I write about all this stuff at theescapeartist.me. So it's www.theescapeartist, all one word, .me. And I do a weekly Substack as well, which you can find me from The Escape Artist. And so, I write there's a free weekly newsletter, so you can sign up to that. And that's where I kind of give my thoughts every week.
Brilliant. Then thank you very much. And we put that on the show notes as well. Thanks for being our guest.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. That's been really useful. And I think, as I say, we have quite a broad range of listeners. So hopefully, there's something there that can help them sort of start putting those foundations in place.
Yeah. No, it's everyone's journey's different. Everyone has different challenges. Everyone goes through hard times. Everyone goes through some element of depression or whatever in their life. That's all part of the journey. And so just realizing that it's not going to be easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's kind of part of the journey. So great to talk to you guys. I think you're doing great work.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Feel free to reach out to Volker or David via our website, www.manupdown.com, or podcast@manupdown.com, with any feedback or to let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Hear you again soon.